Welcome to the SEI podcast series, a production of Carnegie Mellon University's Software Engineering Institute. The SEI is a federally funded research and development center sponsored by the U.S. Department of Defense and operated by Carnegie Mellon University. A copy of today's podcast will be available on the SEI website at www.sei.cmu.edu/podcasts. My name is Suzanne Miller. I'm a principal researcher here at the SEI, and today I'm delighted to introduce you once again to my friend and colleague, Peter Filer, who is going to talk to us today about virtual integration at the system level and some of the cost savings that have been achieved through some simulation tools and a language that he's responsible, the architecture analysis and design language. So I want to ask Peter to sort of give people who haven't seen you before, because we have interviewed you here before, a little bit of background on what it is you do at the SEI and what is the importance of this work towards understanding how we can not just reduce cost, but reduce failures that can be sometimes catastrophic in very complex systems.
Sure. Yeah, I've been at the SEI for a long time, since 1985, so it makes it 33 years now. And the last 15 some years I have been working on architecture languages that are specifically designed for embedded software systems. So they have enough semantics, especially in terms of timing, execution, and so on, and fault handling type of things, so that we can get our fingers on the real issues in software system architectures, embedded software system architectures. The way I got into that is we took some research from the 90s and turned it into an SAE international standard.
SAE is the Society for Automotive Engineering, which may not seem like the place that you would put an avionics essentially standard.
Yeah, well, automotive, when they started in 1906, automotive meant anything that moves.
Right.
And by the way, they officially now are just called SAE International to make exactly that point.
Okay.
They are actually the largest provider of avionics standards as well. So if you put a seatbelt on in an aircraft, that meets the SAE standard for seatbelts type of thing.
Okay.
But otherwise, most people know it from motor oil, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we developed this language, have been using it to deal with issues in embedded software systems. Because one thing that we have realized is that the cost of embedded software system has skyrocketed.
Yes.
And all this cost growth is happening on the software development side, not on the system development side. And in 2010, we have reached the fact that 70% of the total system development cost now goes into software development. And in addition, on the software development side, half of that cost is 70% of that cost is post-unit test rework.
Right.
What that points out is that it's not the individual functions that we write in software that's the problem, but the way those software functions interact, how they make the computer resource,
interfaces,
and all that. And one reason is obviously because when you do embedded software systems, safety critical systems, they're very time sensitive.
Mm-hmm.
And So what we find is in studies that 70% of these problems are introduced during requirements and architectural design, and 80% of them are discovered post-unit tests. And that's why we then have these percentage numbers that I mentioned to you.
Right. So we'll do the bottom line up front.
Exactly.
You completed a recent study on actually cost savings by doing this kind of virtual integration using AADL. What were the initial results from that study?
Yeah, just again, a little more context. It was done as part of a aerospace industry initiative called System Architecture Virtual Integration, or SAVI. It was done under the Aerospace Vehicle Systems Institute, which is part of Texas A&M. Companies like Airbus, Boeing, Embraer, suppliers, FAA, NASA, SEI, Army, all worked together to deal with that problem of what I just mentioned. And so on the technology side, they then picked AADL as a basis for achieving that. On the other hand, since they were self-funded, they had to go back to their management to make a case for cost savings so
Sure.
that those guys would be willing to invest multi-million dollars, because it's an initiative that has ran for 10 years, and they invested over $40 million out of their own pocket into that. So they had to make a study. So the original return on investment study was done in 2009. And it was actually Jürgen Hansen, who at that time was at the SCI,
Yes.
and Steve Helton from Boeing were the two main characters. I got in late in the game, and several other people on Savvy. So it was that original study, and it's that initially was a report just for the members of that initiative, and this is a public version of the report. There were some follow-on studies within Savvy as well. Then there are articles about that, and we have references to that. And the point of it was that given the numbers that I mentioned before, and the cost of fixing errors
Right.
because of delay, namely errors leaking from the phase they're introduced to a later stage, the cost savings are quite high when you detect them inline that are early
Right,
introduced, because if you discover them at system integration test, the cost of fixing a problem is 300 to 1,000 times higher than doing it up front. So if up front you spend $10,000 fixing it, it's between $3 and $10 million on the back end that you're saving right
and
away.
some of that has to do not with just the software itself, but again, these complex interactions. When you find it there, just figuring out which design elements, which requirements are the ones that need to be fixed, and then all the cascading effects of doing that fix. I mean, there's so many cascading effects the later you get into system integration.
And what the problem that we have is that a lot of these issues are very difficult to detect by testing. Some of them are behavioral, state type of thing you get with state space explosion. So this is where model checking comes into the picture. But then other ones are time sensitive. So for example, if you just change your scheduling algorithm, that affects the stability of your control system. There have been studies that show that, which kind of things you have. If you just add another piece of software to a particular processor, which causes now
A timing shift.
As a result of that, things are off. If you take some software that's, for example, reads a sensor that before ran on a specialized little device, now becomes part of your overall software package in a partition. This partition doesn't always run at the beginning of a time frame.
Right.
So you're not sampling every 10 milliseconds, but off by a couple of milliseconds. You have now virtualized time as well. So that's the other piece of it. We are virtualizing time, we are virtualizing processors and all those through partitioning concepts and various other things that we on one hand introduced to make systems more safe. At the same time, they come with their own risks.
Yes.
And so this is part of the study that we did, and then have mechanisms in the language to go after those kind of architectural issues that really then are very difficult to trace down.
So this really has the potential to revolutionize how these complex systems are built in the future.
That's correct,
and this idea of model-based engineering, which AADL explicitly supports, allows us to find many of these things, as you say, difficult to find in test. Certainly, if we do find them in test, it's late in the time frame in which you get all of the effects of late rework.
Exactly.
And so the most recent study, you do have some data now that actually supports these kinds of arguments, that not only are there significant safety, security, quality attribute kinds of savings in terms of defects that could end up in the field, but also cost of development can be reduced.
Exactly. And so when you look at the cost of development reduction for aircraft that like around 2010 on the commercial side, they were estimating like a limit of what they can afford, a limit of affordability is $10 billion on an aircraft with that cost. They could save around 1/4 of it on the assumption that we catch only half of the problems that are leaking. So we made conservative assumptions about that. In actuality, they are actually catching more than that. But based on the conservative assumptions, they were able to save 25% of the total system development cost, not the software development cost. But if you don't manage that, the software development cost by 2024 will make up 88% of the total system development cost. We came up with those numbers. So the study draws on a whole bunch of background data on these ratios, on the cost factors. There's also the question of the ratio between software development and system development cost. When we did the original study, we said that 2/3, 1/3. At that point, it was based on data that each of the member companies had internally they brought to the table. But we then, in a follow-on project, the Sabi folks then also did, on the cost estimation side, in the original case, we used Kokomo to
which is a common estimating method for
to translate
systems.
the whole thing into dollar figures.
Right.
Later on, they used SEER, which is also a cost estimation tool, with the difference that it accommodates not just for software, but also for system engineering.
Correct.
And it's with that one, then they validated that the ratio we were using in the original study is a fair ratio. And in that context, we were showing that the ratio changes to 88% for 2024 if we don't do anything about it. And that's what led them to do this 10-year project. And meanwhile, the DoD has been embracing that too at the moment, especially the Army is very aggressive on that front. They have a tech demo program called Joint Multi-Role. That's in preparation of the Future Vertical Lift program. They are now in phase 3 and have been using the technology. In the first phase, we did a shadow. Second phase, 8 developer teams used the technology, and now they're pulling it together in the new one as well. So there's real data now confirming some of the estimates that we have.
So you're kind of at a cusp. So I talk about AADL as the overnight success story that took 25 years. And
exactly.
Because there was so much that went into understanding what could be modeled, what could be embedded in the semantics of a language, what had to stay outside, et cetera, what kind of environment and tools. I know you went through a period where sort of figuring out the tooling environment and the tool chain that would allow this to be most effective was a big part of the research. You're at a place now where there's no longer a question of why would we do this. It's become a question of how do we do this.
Yeah, so we're moving from early adopters to the mainstream, and there is usually this big gap. And so the tools that we initially provided were open source tools that were initially intended for prototyping type of thing, and people now are expecting more industrial strength tools. So in that context, then the one question is, we can turn this tool into an industrial strength, or we can say, let's get the buy-in from the commercial industry. And so this is what Sabi was doing on the tail end the last 3 years. They got commercial companies to sign up supporting this technology. One of the companies that has been very good at doing that is ANSYS. With their tool suite, they have SCADE for detailed design modeling.
And they're system tools for the most part.
Well, they are interesting because they are very good at system engineering support, at detailed design, and then also physical modeling. But they were missing this middle layer of architecture, and they mainly bought it software systems. So they themselves were interested because of their customers to fill that gap. So they have now, with the last release a year ago, I think it was, or they are now including support for AADL as well.
So that's a huge transition to get commercial support for these. That's one of the transition mechanisms for getting that support.
And a lot of questions that then come up is people saying, well, we are already a SysML house. Why do we need AADL? There's all those kinds of questions coming up. But there's also the argument we are already doing model-based engineering. Yes, model-based engineering, control engineers have done that a long time ago already. This is another step. Virtual integration is another step. With SysML, you do it for system engineering. And with that middle layer, that's the embedded software system architectures. This is where then AADL fills the gap. And it's really the combination of all three of them are allowing us to move to a model-based development process and certification process, which now brings up some other questions. Namely, if you look at the way you're contracting, how do you do RFPs and RFIs and
Right, requests for proposals and things like that.
Are we going to post a model of what we are asking for?
And who
when they
owns the
send in
model?
proposals, they ship us models.
Yeah.
And so these are some things that we had exercised in the feasibility study on the SAVI, and currently in this next phase of JMR will be exercising as well. So they will identify 2 system integrator teams, 2 system architects, and then several supplier teams and they will go through a whole process of full development cycle to exercise what does it mean, how would we need to change the acquisition processes, how do we change the way we are doing certification and qualification instead of getting tons of paper.
Right.
You get models on the government side. We now need to have labs set up so that we can handle those models, verify those models, in addition to verifying the design and the code and all that. So we're not doing away with, for example, flight certification of the actual aircraft. What we are doing is running these other things up front so that when we do flight certification, the aircraft isn't parked at the tarmac for 4 months because somebody misconfigured a compiler and the code never started up on the
That's
aircraft.
one of the things that really increases that overall system development cost is the unanticipated cost of rework when you're that far downstream. In the case of airplanes, when you're doing flight testing, if there's any safety concerns, you can't fly.
Exactly.
And nobody else can use the airplane for their test until you're done. So there's a lot of, again, cascading effects that happen that we can prevent.
Good that you bring that up, because the cost figures that we mention here are pure system development time. There's cost savings that you have because you now don't delay delivery.
Right.
So you can put your aircraft into a mission much earlier. There is also less safety risks and the consequential costs of those things as well, that those kind of costs are not included in some of the figures we are quoting here. So it's quite interesting.
So 26% we could say is probably the lowest cost savings over the life cycle of a product. And I even think about, we haven't even talked about sustainment.
Exactly.
Once we get into sustainment, if I have a robust model that I can use to test ideas for either introducing new enhancements or correcting faults that are found, I have a whole different way of working through my sustainment issues and prioritizing what can be done. Right now, things that are too hard have to wait for a modernization kind of activity, and we now have the opportunity to look at some of those things a different way. So there's a huge explosion of possibilities that this enables.
And so one of the things that we are, now that we have the JMR running quite well, this is a new program where we're bringing the technology in. One of the questions is for existing programs, can you bring this technology to the table and
for a legacy system?
For legacy systems. Yeah. And the answer is yes, because one of the things you can do is use your modeling capability as a diagnostic tool. You're looking at your existing system. Many people that use these systems or maintain these systems, they create themselves a mental model of what's going on inside. And they know that certain parts are just a mess and certain other parts, they created themselves an abstracted model so they get some sense of it. So if we can, on one hand, capture a clean abstract model of what it's supposed to be, and then say for those parts that are a mess, why are they a mess?
And start untangling
that using the model as a structure, because based on the model we now have some predictions about its behavior and explanation for why things misbehave.
Sure.
So you start bringing that in as a diagnostic tool. It doesn't drive the development yet, but you already are getting cost savings in the sense of the next time somebody comes with a new issue, you pull your model out and say, based on my model,
here's what's likely.
Either the idealized model, is it going to happen there too? So is it inherent in the architecture as reflected in the model, or is it just because of the part that's messy?
Right.
And if that's the case, then we can justify cleaning up that part that's messy and an investment in fixing that. So there's some interesting ways of incrementally bringing that into legacy systems as well, which we haven't systematically explored yet, but as we have programs that are struggling and are willing to
Sure.
work with us with that, we can demonstrate for the legacy side as well. And then once we have data collected, we can then say,
So there's
with ROI
sustainment
numbers.
coming in the future. We haven't talked about security, but security is another quality attribute that is systemic,
Yeah.
pervasive, has all the same issues as safety in terms of it being difficult to figure out the source of issues.
Exactly.
Is that another area that you're looking at
Yeah.
exploring in the future?
The timing, I mean, we mentioned timing as an issue. Safety is another one that we have explicit support in AADL to do safety. Safety tends to be primarily done during system engineering. And one of the questions we asked when we started our work with the AADL and with Savi is to say, for aircraft, there's all kinds of safety processes in place. Despite the fact that we have those, why is it that we have all these failures in the software? Well, the safety process is doing your hazard analysis and your fault impact analysis and those kinds of things you do during system engineering. By the time you get to software, it's not done anymore because they're worrying about physical parts breaking. Well,
Sure, yeah, which you have to.
if software has become a major source of misbehavior, we need to continue to apply that process there too. You tend to not think about it in the traditional safety sense, but you have to address it because we cannot, currently when these people do that stuff, they make zero defect assumptions for software, which can't be done.
Unfortunately, not right.
So you have to basically assume that there will be some fault in the software. So you have to, first of all, turn everything upside down. And secondly, what you have to do is focus on eliminating it or demonstrating that you can handle exceptional conditions.
Yes.
And exceptional conditions are either intentionally to support them or simply as deal with mismatched assumptions and some misbehaviors of somebody else.
Right.
As we do that from the safety side, the same issue we have on the security side.
Exactly.
For embedded systems was they were unconnected, therefore we don't have to worry about security. If you then put a firewall around it, that may help, but firewalls aren't 100% either. So once you're inside, if you then can take over any part of the system, doesn't work. You need internal protection as well.
So that's a different set of exception conditions that you need to be able to demonstrate that you can deal with.
Exactly, and so what that leads to is the same way that from a safety perspective, I have to protect one part of the software from another part of the software from a security perspective as well. And so we actually are doing a project right now, we call it Integrated Safety and Security Engineering for Mission Critical Systems, where we are saying there's a lot of commonality in mechanisms and in analysis capabilities. We have fault tree analysis and we have attack tree analysis. What's the difference?
Yeah.
Okay. And in terms of protection, we use a combination of techniques.
I have a safety exception, I have a security exception.
Exactly. So those are some things we are
them.
now exploring and bringing into the picture. That's even safety and security play together as well, not just the performance type of things.
So if I'm a program manager in a complex system with lots of software and I'm interested in learning more about how to bring AADL and the supporting technologies and tools into my space, what are some of the resources that we can offer from the SEI viewpoint to help them with that?
Well, there is a wide range of things. We have podcasts, we have tech reports, we have
blog posts. You just wrote a blog post.
We have blog posts. Again, depending on the questions that you have, if it's as a manager or a program manager, the cost type of thing, it's this ROI, and there's other presentations and things that we have. And we have supporting data that goes beyond the ones that we used in the Savi Notion. So, for example, people are bringing in data even for IT systems to confirm that the cost saving isn't quite as large, because in IT systems it's largely functional issues. There's some performance issues, but
different context.
Different context. So we have things on that front. We are expanding on the educational front in the context of JMR. We have been developing like engineering handbooks and management handbooks around this virtual integration process.
And certainly the SAE standard. The SAE has a whole set of supports as well.
And then we have, there's the standard. It's actually a suite of documents. And the standard committee is still quite active. We just met 3 weeks ago here in Pittsburgh. so
That's
so
the second
standard,
time you've met in Pittsburgh.
So yeah, so the standard itself is quite active, and there's lots of interest in the whole thing. There's courses, among other things, we have at the SCI. We're working on getting some of that stuff to places like DAU, if you're from the DoD side.
And the OSATE environment.
Well, and then
still
the
active.
OSATE environment is something we've always had publicly
Right.
available. It's open source, it's free, you can use it, it has all kinds
For
of support.
exploration purposes, if you just kind of
Exactly.
want to dip your foot in the water.
And then meanwhile, like I said, there are companies like ANSYS who have commercial tools. There is
Right.
Elidis in France who have actually 2 tool suites on that front. There is also Adventium. Adventium Labs is a company in Minneapolis. One of the people that's working there is Steve Vestal, who developed in the 90s the language that became the basis for ADL.
Okay. All right.
Those guys have been working with us on this JMR program and are providing all kinds of tools as well.
Okay.
And so they now those are tools that are extensions to OSATE, and they have a subscriber program where you can get capabilities that don't come with
Right,
plain
that are
vanilla
not- okay.
OSATE. So they, for example, have a security
This is a
tool.
completely different support environment than 5 years ago.
Oh yeah,
And
things
so
have
I
moved
think
forward
that's-
quite a bit.
Yeah. If you
And-
haven't looked at AADL in 5 years, it's time to look again.
Exactly. And then the other thing that's interesting too is that a number of researchers have decided to bring more of their analytical
Nice.
capabilities, also code generation capabilities. We are working on integrating the ADL capabilities with something called FACE, which is a common platform
It's
type
another
of thing.
standard, yeah.
And also translation between the SysML and the ADL to help the process of how to move between system engineering and embedded software
That's
system
been in the
engineering.
work for a while.
So there's tooling on that front that's getting developed as well. So people can actually try to make use of it in the real setting.
I am so pleased at the progress. I mean, we've talked for many years about sort of inching up that hill, and I think we're at a point where we're going to start seeing some really interesting and impactful, not just single program results, but across a wide variety of contexts. So I look forward to the next time we get to talk to see what else has been very successful with this. I
Sure.
know it's a lot of work. I know it's not easy.
And what's also fun is that a lot of other people that weren't part of the original group around ADL are talking about virtual
Yes.
integration and model-based engineering type of
Yes.
things. And so I see slides that we originally developed pop up in all kinds of people's presentations.
Well, actually, that's one of
including
the
Dr.
signs
Lindemann
of
recently.
of
At a keynote
transition
speech,
success.
yeah,
So
exactly.
is that our work is being referenced by others. So that's amazing.
Cool.
So I look forward to your work in sustainment. I'm doing some work in that arena myself, and so I have some particular interest in that
Sure.
arena. And I just want to thank you for stopping by and talking to us about this again. It's I guess we have to do it every 5 years, whether we need it or not. Maybe
Exactly.
sooner. Maybe sooner next time.
And I'm always having fun doing that with you.
Well, thank you. So I want to thank you for joining us
Sure.
today. And this blog post that I mentioned is available. The references that Peter and I talked about will also be available in the transcript. We make all those available to our listeners and our viewers. This podcast is available at the SEI website at sei.cmu.edu/podcasts. And it's available on the iTunes site and on the YouTube channel for the SEI. Yes, we have a YouTube channel. As always, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to send us an email at info@sei.cmu.edu. Thank you so much for viewing.